So here we go, the Summer 2020 Olympic Games are almost upon us, and they are officially known as the Games of the 32nd Olympiad. Now, Tokyo is going to play host to the 6th edition of the Olympic Games triathlon, and history is already guaranteed to take place, given that neither of the defending Olympic champions are on the start line, and excitingly, we also have the addition of the mixed team relay for the first time, meaning that there is a third gold medal up for grabs in triathlon. Now, the 110 athletes from 38 different nations have been finalised, and they are about to achieve a lifetime goal. So, what is the history of the Olympic Games triathlon? How did those athletes qualify? What are the conditions that they are going to face, and what do the courses look like? Well, to answer all those questions and some more besides, I have got those in today's video. Right then, so let's get going by having a look at the history of triathlon in the Olympic Games, and that means starting with the debut event in Sydney 2000. Now in the women's race, it was Bridget Mhern of Switzerland who upset the apple cart by beating pre-race favourite and hometown athlete Michaeli Jones. Now this result produced a bit of controversy because in 2005 Mhern went on to test positive for EPO in an out of competition control, and this as a consequence meant she retired from the sport but still stayed as our inaugural women's Olympic gold medalist. In the men's race, it was Canada's Simon Whitfield who also ensured an equally unexpected and dramatic victory. He used a very fast run and a closing blistering sprint finish to pass Germany's Stefan Vukovic in the closing metres. And then moving on to Athens in 2004, well, this race was billed as an extremely demanding event, and without even talking about the searing temperatures involved, it was the very, very hilly bike course that was the talking point. In the women's race, it was Kate Allen racing for Austria, but actually an Australian herself, who produced an absolutely blistering run to pass Loretta Harrop of Australia in the closing metres, winning by just 7 seconds. The TV cameras hadn't even seen her coming as she flew past the Australian to take the win, and an unexpected one for her adopted nation of Austria. Now as for the men, it was Hamish Carter of New Zealand who beat his fellow Kiwi athlete Bevan Docherty for that gold medal, and also by an equally small margin of just 8 seconds, and mirroring the excitement of that women's race. Now moving on to Beijing, and it was Australia's Emma Snowsill who deservedly stamped her mark by winning ahead of one of the other most decorated athletes of all time, Vanessa Fernandez. And interestingly, it was a certain Daniela Ryf who placed 7th in that Beijing race. Now moving on to the men's race, and it was Germany's Jan Frodeno who snatched an entirely unexpected victory ahead of Sydney Olympic champion Simon Whitfield, who himself beat Athens medalist Bevan Docherty, who themselves became the first double Olympic triathlon medalists. And in so doing, they relegated pre-race favourite Javier Gomez to perhaps the worst position of all in an Olympic Games, 4th. And then moving on to London 2012, triathlon was now in its 4th Olympiad, and with this the home games provided an overwhelming favourite in Alistair Brownlee. But he dealt with this pressure superbly by winning, and not only that, but his younger brother Johnny took 3rd place, with Javier Gomez sandwiched in between them with the silver. But perhaps the most amazing sprint finish of all is the women's race at the London 2012 Olympics, providing perhaps the most iconic image that we have from triathlon. A nail-biting sprint finish between Switzerland's Nicholas Spirig and Sweden's Lisa Norden. Now this was settled by a photo finish that was later determined to be just 15 centimetres. Now the Swedish Olympic Committee did appeal this to the Court of Arbitration, but Lisa Norden herself said she was happy with her silver medal and considered it to be a gold. And so this takes us to the Rio de Janeiro Games of 2016, which saw the fields charge down the famed Copacabana beach to start their swims. Now in the men's race, it was Alistair Brownlee who became the first triathlete in history to successfully defend an Olympic title. And also his younger brother upgraded that bronze medal he had won by earning a silver. Now as for the women, well, it was Gwen Jorgensen from the USA who lived up to all of her pre-race hype and the dominance that she had shown in the WTS series over previous seasons. In so doing, she defeated the defending champion Nicholas Spirig from Switzerland during the run. And as a result, she added to the sole bronze medal that the US team had earned, which was by Susan Williams back in the Athens Games. So how does the type of racing that we're about to see in the coming days differ from long course racing in general? Well, in the 80s and early 1990s, triathlon generally was a non-drafting sport. But to be able to gain inclusion into the Olympic family, there needed to be a way to eliminate the possibilities for cheating or essentially any use of the referee to step in from time to time. And the simplest way for this to happen was for the drafting to be legal during the bike leg. Now, this was met with quite some resistance by athletes at the time. It wasn't a popular decision, and after all, change is never usually well received. However, this is the fundamental difference between short course Olympic distance racing and any other forms of the sport. Drafting is allowed. Now, in terms of the equipment, well, the bikes are always road bikes with the drop handlebars, and if you look closely, you'll notice that the athletes usually have small clip-on aero bars that are able to allow them to get into a more aerodynamic position. However, those cannot extend any further forward than the front of the brake lever hoods in length. And then as for racing dynamics, well, there are differences there too. In terms of the swim, well, this is almost always a dive start from a pontoon, although those Rio Olympic Games starts were a rare exception to this. And then the athletes will also exit the water mid-race for what is called an Australian exit and then dive back into the water. And this can also cause gaps and splits in the race if athletes aren't paying attention. And then of course we've got transitions, both first and second transitions, and these are critical in athletes' medal chances in short course racing. If they're slow and clunky and getting their wetsuit off and not very efficient, then there's a good chance that they'll miss that front lead pack. And also if they can't get their helmet unfastened quickly enough when they get off the bike, then that means that they don't start the run well enough. So these things are really critical because the margins are that fine. So how have the athletes themselves gotten their Olympic ticket? Well, qualification for the Games is a multi-year process that takes in their top results from both the World Series events and World Cup events too. However, those athletes do have to be ranked inside the world's top 140 to be eligible. Although it's worth pointing out that it's not actually the athletes themselves who qualify, but rather their national federations, who can secure a maximum of 3 slots per gender. And then it is up to them to provide or produce their own individual selection policies to decide who's on their teams for Tokyo. Now, an anomaly of the Olympic Games that is by no means specific to our sport of triathlon is that it is not the world's top-ranked 55 male and female athletes who will be standing on that pontoon. Now, a good example of this is both the British and American women's teams. Now, they both have numerous women ranked within the world's top 20, but there will only be 3 of those in each country that are eligible to race in Tokyo. Now, a fun fact to finish on for qualification is the fact that there will actually be 2 sets of brothers racing at the Games. There will be Israel's Ran and Shachar Sagiv and Russia's Igor and Dan Polyansky. Right, so what about the specifics of the courses in and around Tokyo Bay that the athletes will be racing on in the coming days? Well, the athletes will begin from a pontoon and dive into the bay to initially complete a larger 1 kilometre loop that follows the shoreline before exiting and then diving back in to complete a smaller 500 metre lap. Then onto the bike, well, there's almost no elevation gain for the athletes to be worried about, with a sole 8-metre incline being the only point of note. However, the 7-lap bike course is actually 43 kilometres long rather than the usual 40. Then to finish, the athletes will complete a 2.5k lap on the run 4 times, and again, much like the bike, no elevation gain for them to be concerned about. But what they will be worried about undoubtedly will be the climatic conditions on race day. It is going to be extremely hot and very humid on the race morning, and this will be the factor that undoubtedly the athletes will have uppermost in their mind, and without question is what most of their training and their final preparations will have been geared around. So when does all this racing take place? Well, the men's race will start at 6:30 a.m. on July the 26th, local time in Japan, with the women's race the following day on July the 27th at the same time of day. And then we've got the mixed team relay, and that will kick off at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday the 31st of July. Now, these early start times, or unusual start times should I say, are in an attempt to give the athletes as best a possible chance to cope with those extreme temperatures and before the heat of the day really kicks in. But those extreme temperatures could still be a factor in determining the type of racing that we see in Tokyo, because there is something called the heat stress indicator that has to be taken into account by officials. Now, this is a combination of the heat, the humidity, the wind speed, the cloud cover, and the sun angle. Now, with all of those taken into account, if that number that they create is too high, then we could see the racing shortened. Now, it is worth remembering that at the test event in 2019, the women's run was halved and shortened to a 5k distance. So there is precedent for this. And then, of course, we also have the swim temperature to take into account, because this is also something that the athletes might have to battle against come race day. The water in Tokyo Bay in 2019 at that test event was 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, for reference, there is a threshold of 89 degrees Fahrenheit, and if that water temperature gets reached or even topped, we could have the swim shortened or, worst case scenario, potentially cancelled. So the Olympic triathlons are literally just around the corner now, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited to see not only 2 new individuals, but also a new mixed team relay champions be crowned. Now, I hope you found this video interesting and useful, so please hit that thumb up like button if that's the case, and don't forget, of course, to subscribe to the channel to get all the other content that we're making.